G'day expats. Today we're talking about a very important topic, which is the top 10 aged care tips for expats with elderly parents. I'm joined today with my co-host Danielle Robertson of DR Care Solutions. Morning, Daniel.
Hi, how are you, James?
I'm well, Danielle, and thank you for joining me today, talking about some very important topic, especially, I suppose, life after retirement, and how to look at all the, I suppose, different items, especially that's going to be affecting Australian expats with elderly parents. So we'll just kick-start it today and jump into it. Next slide. Just a brief disclaimer, ladies and gentlemen. Today, everything you hear, it's general in nature. It's not personal advice, and therefore, if you do need personal advice, whether it's regard to the aged care side or I suppose the financial planning side, please do reach out to myself or Danielle. Just everything contained within this PowerPoint presentation is general in nature. So just a careful disclaimer there. Moving into the next slide, who is Atlas? Atlas Wealth Management. Well, we're the leading provider of Australian expat financial advice, won multiple awards, both domestic and international, for providing advice to Australian expats that are living overseas. We're lucky enough to be based in 28 countries now with our clients, and obviously focusing on that specific niche of Australian expats or Australian citizens that are non-residents for tax purposes. And we're lucky where all our advisors are degree qualified with postgraduate certifications as well. Who am I joined by today with? I'm joined with Danielle Robertson of DR Care Solutions. Obviously, running through Danielle's history, she established DR Care Solutions in 2015. Danielle has a very large history working in the industry for over, I think previously you said 33 years. Is that correct now, Danielle?
That's right. It's a long time, but yes, that's correct. So it was a family business. Yeah,
that's right. So previously the CEO of Dial an Angel for 11 years, and then obviously your main passion is assisting Australians to find the right care in a timely manner. At the moment, your firm focuses on assisting clients with the aged care, home care, retirement villages, residential respite, palliative care, and dementia-specific care solutions as well. The next slide that we're going to go into now, ladies and gentlemen, is a bit of a case study which reflects on how this can impact expats, and it's a case study where Danielle assisted this client in quite a timely manner. So we'll just run through what the situation was just to help frame this. So there's an Australian expat living and working in London. They had concerns for their 85-year-old mother, especially the health and well-being. And the issue was that she was becoming more and more frail as time got on. She lived alone as children were living away or overseas. There was a lot of uncertainty around whether she was eating nutritional meals. She was finding it difficult to cook, grocery shop and clean. There was diminished social activity as she had stopped attending church since her driver's license had been revoked, which I imagine the driver's license getting revoked, that's pretty common, especially when you're getting a bit older as well.
And people losing their independence, it creates all sorts of problems that they feel that, you know, their life is over because they now have to rely on other people to transport them or public transport. So it's a really tough one, taking that driver's license away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the main one you touched on there, independence, not being able to go out and see their friends as easy as it was previously. Church, obviously, in this case, tea, coffee. And I mean, one, I suppose, point that I noticed here was she was of Filipino descent and she was reverting back to her mother tongue. Was that just because of not being as socially active as previously?
Possibly, and also given her health, and it was not only her speech, but she wasn't wanting to eat the foods that Australians were eating, and she wanted to revert back to cooking Filipino meals, but she wasn't actually doing it. So you know, that was
difficult situation then.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, very difficult. And then obviously no contact there with My Aged Care, which we're going to dive into a little later in the slides, what My Aged Care is as well. But I mean, moving into, I suppose, how DR Care Solutions assisted this client, you know, what are some of the things that you went through with this client as well as the expat as well, who was the daughter?
Yes, well, it was the financial advisor that put me in touch with the lass who lived in the UK and said, look, Danielle's in Australia on the ground and she can be your ears and eyes for your mum. The daughter had no idea where to start. She was in a high-powered role, and she really didn't have the time to start coming back to Australia and dealing with this whole situation. So she and I had a Skype call for over an hour, and we planned out how we were going to do this, obviously remotely. So she had to actually contact My Aged Care initially before I even went to do the assessment to organise an assessment. And once she had a date, as her mother's designated representative, I went in and was there in advance of the My Aged Care assessment. So I did my own care needs assessment of this lady. She was not too bad actually, living alone, and, you know, given her age, she was doing very well. So we pulled together a fact find, very similar to what financial advisors do, but it was a bit more holistic. It was about her wants and wishes, her needs, her hobbies, what she used to do. She used to play the piano, very religious lady, you know, had a core group of church friends. So her missing out on church was a big thing. And then we developed the life plan, and that was virtually a full life plan of exactly the fact find with some recommendations on what sort of care and support services that she'd need. The ACAT team, which is the Aged Care Assessment Team, came in, and they're organised by My Aged Care. They did a similar assessment of this lady, but it was more about what she can and can't do for herself. So physically, what can she do? Cognitively, what can she do and what can't she do? And then basically, they sent through a report as well, which gave her a level of government funding. But that's all very well to have a level of funding. The funding wasn't going to be released from the government because there's a long queue for home care packages. So what we did in the meantime, because the daughter was quite concerned about leaving her mum alone and waiting for the government-funded package to come through, so we started fee-for-service care and support services for her through one of the providers that are on our preferred provider network until the package was released. And then once the package was released over a 12-month period, we actually then included additional hours of fee-for-service plus the government-funded service to ensure that she could remain at home with the support she needed. There was an added little hiccup on her case because she wanted Filipino carers to come in and work with her so that they could speak the language and cook a meal that she enjoyed cooking. So we did put that out to our care provider network, and 2 providers came back and said we have Filipino speaking carers in the area that this client lives, and we matched that client with one of the providers who had Filipino carers. And that client is still going today. I contact the daughter on a regular basis to ensure that mum's okay, that does she need more hours, is she well. The daughter did come back about 2 years ago, and I met her in person for the first time. Her mother was in hospital. She had developed pneumonia, and so we ramped up services. We made sure that mum went home and that her food was being provided and that she was having the socialisation she required and being taken to church and catching up with her friends. So she's recovered quite well given her age. So that's continuing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've also given the daughter as well as, I suppose, I believe the son as well, a lot of reassurance, knowing that she still has a level of independence with that carer. The fact that they're from Filipino descent means she's also getting the delicious meals that she wanted, that she was transitioning over to. So overall, it sounds like an amazing result, especially the fact that in these situations, especially for expats, when something like this plays out, a lot of the time expats will have to resign and come back to Australia and then sort of have to deal with it. And I suppose when you look at it from the expat's point of view, they've employed a professional that's able to set up this, I suppose, best case scenario situation for their mum, but they've actually also been able to stay in their role overseas as well.
Correct. And it just gives them peace of mind knowing that it can be done professionally and quickly. For someone that has never touched aged care or disability care, it can take them 5 to 6 weeks to figure out the system, and then, you know, they've got to get back to wherever they're working. So, you know, our firm, DR Care Solutions, can manage this process within a 5-day period. So, you know, it might not be that we get government funding immediately, but we start everything in train and we're on top of things, and as things come through, we're in touch with the family. So it just is, you know, the son on this case, he did live in Sydney, but he was an airline pilot, and so he was in and out all the time. So he could not be there for ACAT assessments, and the daughter felt that there was a trust factor there, that she was allowing me into her mother's home to make sure that her mother was not vulnerable in an ACAT assessment, saying the wrong things at the wrong time, and making sure that she was getting the right outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, peace of mind. The fact that she can't be there and be there while the ACAT team are there providing their assessment, and you're there making sure it's being done correctly, and they're also potentially not taking advantage of the mother as well in terms
Correct.
of, so, the funding might not have to be as much as it should have. Yeah, clearly some significant level of peace of mind. I suppose this case study and what we've just sort of learnt, it does play well into this first tip. And the first tip is planning ahead. Now, obviously, this scenario was, I would say, mainly reactionary, where financial advisors said, okay, something needs to be done. They've contacted you, they've put you in touch. But, I mean, tell us a bit about early intervention, those difficult discussions that need to be had with the elders. Is there a good time to start planning? Is there a time frame? What have you seen with your experience?
Look, I do a lot of speaking engagements, and I recommend have the conversation now. I mean, coming up to Christmas, not on Christmas Day, don't bring up the topic,
No.
hey Mum, I think that you're not doing so well.
Yeah.
But while you're back in Australia speaking with family, ask around, check with your siblings or any other relatives if they've noticed any changes that you might not be identifying with when you first get here. But to have the discussion, that really depends on your relationship with that person.
Yeah.
Because if you've got an open relationship and open discussions, it'll be easy to say, look, Mum, I'm a bit concerned. I'm overseas. I just want to make sure you're managing okay. Is there any tasks that you don't like doing anymore, such as cleaning the bathroom, or, are you finding it difficult to cook for yourself or shop or get out and about? So just asking those questions, and it's just practical, common sense sort of questions to be asking. Are you having difficulty showering yourself or getting your hair done, nails done? Have you been getting to the podiatrist? I'm a bit worried about your feet, or your mobility seems to be a bit precarious. Have you thought about, maybe we can get some physiotherapy for you? So it's just actually asking those questions and just saying, look, I'd love to be able to plan ahead with you so that if a life event occurs, we've got a plan in place and we're not all going to panic, that we just enact that plan. And whether it's through DR Care Solutions or it's just a family writing down what their loved ones want, because a lot of people don't ask them. I have families come and tell me what their mum or dad wants, and I'm going, well, can I ask mum or dad? Because really it's up to the individual as to what their wants and wishes are. So I think you open up the conversation, and it can be, people in their 60s who are thinking about retiring, and you might be a younger person of 40 going, look, I'm coming back to Australia. I want to talk to mum and dad about their plans for the future. Are they thinking of downsizing? Have they sorted their estate planning? Have they thought about what happens if a life event intervenes? What happens if that one dies and the other one's alone? So just to ask those questions, and it's not, I mean, look, a lot of people say, I don't think I really want to plan ahead, but I tell you what, it's much better planning ahead. It's like a insurance policy. Have it there and hope you never need it, rather than needing it and not having it. So to me, that's absolutely imperative of planning ahead. And I've had the difficult discussions with my parents. I've had the difficult discussions with my kids. I've told them what I want and what I don't want. So, and I mean, my kids are in their 20s, I'm in my 50s, and my mother's in her 80s. So, that's the sort of generation we're talking about. It's a sandwich generation who've generally got younger kids, but aging parents or aging grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the questions that you framed then earlier, they're not intrusive. They're just, how are you going, How are you going in the shower? How are you going to the shops? All these sort of things, I notice that, like you said, you're not as mobile as you used to be, or you're a bit more, I suppose, cautionary when you're getting up. What's going on there? They're not hard questions. They're just day-to-day living questions, and it shouldn't
That's
be.
right. And you're showing concern. Yeah, you're showing concern and compassion. And, I mean, the older we get, you see changes. And given the expats are maybe only coming back once a year, they would see significant changes in a 12-month period with a parent or a grandparent. If you're living with someone, you don't actually see those changes occur. But if you're not around and you come back and you get a big shock, sometimes you go, gosh, what's happened,
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that you name dropped just in that conversation just then was life event. And it does lead us on to that next tip, which, I've heard you mentioned this word a few times now, life event. And I really, I want you to flesh it out and tell me what it actually means, a life event.
Well, look, there's lots of different life events. It could be a stroke. And I mean, that's not just for an elderly person. I mean, we've had clients in their 30s, 40s who have had strokes, and it can affect their whole life. Development of cancer or another terminal illness. It could be a heart attack. I mean, they're becoming more and more common, unfortunately. The development of dementia, having a fall, fracturing a bone or a hip or an ankle or an arm, and so anything like that, a degenerative disease. So it might be motor neurons, it might be Huntington's disease, it might be MS, it could be numerous degenerative diseases that come on slowly, and you need to be planning ahead for that. Heart attacks, strokes, falls, everything to do with an illness that happens overnight. Your life can change in an instant. And so what I say is plan ahead for a life event. You might not ever need to worry about it. But if you do, you've got the plan as to what your wants and wishes are. And if you lose capacity, what is it that you want? How do you want it? Where do you want to be kept? Where do you want to be living? What sort of care do you want? Do you want care? Do you want intervention? So there's, lots of options there too to sort of think about. No, we work with families to say what happens if. And I mean, if they've had heart issues before, have you thought about what happens if you do have a stroke or a heart attack? The development of dementia is a big issue, and some people say, oh look, that's really for very old people. We've seen so many early cases of early onset dementia, and that can be someone in their 50s and 60s, and that's quite sad. But it does happen, and it's actually managing that process. Do we try and keep them at home? Once again, it depends on behaviours and the care required, and whether the person is prepared, who their carer is prepared to look after that person, or whether they need support, or whether they need to move that person into residential aged care. So, a life event can happen at any time. I've had a client that developed cancer. I had a client that has developed kidney issues, kidney failure, like a leukemia as well with that. And, so you've just got to deal with things as they come up. So once again, when you're talking to your family members at Christmas or around that time, is asking, how's their year been? What's actually happened in their life? Have they been to their GP? Have they been to any specialists, to try and suss out what it is that's actually going on? A lot of older people won't tell you. They say, I never see my GP, or I saw them last week and I see them every week, and, everything's fine. But you can also say, what is it that you're seeing them for, mum or dad? Is it for medication? What sort of medications are you on? Write those medications down, do a Google search and just see what it is, because that might give you a better idea of actually what's happening if your parents aren't being open and honest as to what's actually happening with them. So, and as I said, a lot of older people will say, oh, nothing's wrong,
I know.
and they're on medications.
From their point of view, I mean, it is a hard topic for elderly people to talk about, because I think naturally they're going to be like, if I start saying these things, I might lose a bit of independence here. It might be a case where if I mention, my back's starting to hurt a bit, or my hips are starting to hurt a bit, and that's why I'm on this medication now, or I've got a bit of macular degeneration, and that's why I'm taking these eye drops now. There is that fear that if they say these things, that they're thinking that, they are going to be put into a home of some sort, or lose some independence.
Yeah, but that's something that they can discuss and actually say, well, how can we support you to remain at home? If you want to remain at home, how can we help you to get some support? Not so much care, and I think try and avoid the word care, because people just go, I don't need care. So it's more like, how can we support you to remain at home? And it might be that some domestic help, they don't want to clean the shower, or the bathroom's really bad, or the kitchen, the fridge is filthy, or whatever it be that, the older people get, they don't see the dust, they don't see the mess, and it's actually supporting them to remain at home if that is their wish.
Yeah, of course. And I think this feeds in well to the next slide, where you discussed, and you gave already an example of someone that had a stroke that was in their 30s, which is terrible. But essentially the average client, the average client that you see, it sounds like there is no sort of age that dictates that, because it can be caused by one of those life events, which could mean you could be seeing someone as young as 30.
That's right. Or even, some of my clients who are going through NDIS, which is the
Yep.
National Disability Insurance Scheme, that can be from anyone under the age of 65. So it can be a child. It could be up to someone, 65, and then the aged care system then takes them over generally from age 65. But so it can be at any time. I've had clients in their 40s, 50s. I've got a client at the moment. He's 52. Actually, he's just turned 53. He has Huntington's disease, which is a degenerative disease. We've got him keep living at home. So, that with care, with support and care services, so he doesn't go into institutionalisation. He's quite cognitively sound at this stage, but he, his condition will deteriorate and it develops dementia-like symptoms. So the carers are reporting back to the care provider and me as well to understand where he's at, and he's onwardly assessed on a regular basis to make sure that we're providing the right care at the right time for this gent. So it doesn't matter what age and the situation. It can be people who are on pensions. It could be high net wealth individuals. It could be, often it's the children that are paying for me. They will pay for the DR Care Solutions team to go in, but the elderly person might be on a pension. So we work together to get the, they might be going in as a low means client into a residential aged care. It doesn't matter what their financial situation is or their age. We work with everyone, and I've helped 129 families in the last 4.5 years, 22 of those into residential aged care, the balance with home care or retirement living with home care coming through. So, and they're all different ages. At the moment, the average age of my clients is about 88, but I've got a 98-year-old gent as well, and 95-year-old woman. So, it varies, so it's not just always about aging. So
no, that's right. And I think the takeaway there is no average client, because it can come on from that life event. And yes, it can be somewhat skewed towards being a bit older, but as you just reflected, that it can be people that are a lot younger due to the NDIS situation as well. So that's pretty important, because people will, they might think aged care, home care, it's people that are, life after retirement, but it's not. It really isn't. And people need to have a bit more of an understanding of that. So that's pretty important.
We all drive cars as well, if there's a car accident and, we've got back injury or, whatever it be. It can be anyone. I mean, we've all probably had some sort of car accident at some stage in our lives. So, most of them are minor, but sometimes you're in a big accident and it can change your life forever. So, paraplegic, quadriplegia, all sorts of different things, brain injuries. So there's lots of different things that can happen to you.
Absolutely.
It's a bit depressing. It's a bit depressing, but as long as you plan ahead for those, if and when they do happen.
It's a tough topic, and I take my hat off to you, because some of the things that you would have to deal with and the families and the discussions that you're having, it's such a hard topic, and that's why there's not many people that are doing what you're doing right now. And it's important we get this message out there, because I imagine when an expat or just a normal Australian tax resident comes face to face with this issue, they throw their hands up and go, I don't know. I don't know what to do. And so I think it's pretty important that we get this message out there now.
Yeah, and I even had a family that had a rehabilitation surgeon as the son, who contacted me and said, look, I've been talking to my parents for 2 years and they won't tell me what they want. So bringing in a third party, those parents within 30 minutes opened up and told me everything, what they want, what their needs are, what they wish for. And the poor son, his jaw was dropped. He's just going, I can't believe it. It's taken me to bring you in to make sure that, we've got that all documented. So, sometimes
absolutely.
Party, if it's a bit difficult discussions, to actually bring up that and making people feel comfortable about talking about what their wants and wishes are.
Yeah, and it helps that you know the right questions to ask as well, because a lot of the time, whilst we might see this webinar and get a bit of an idea of the conversations we had, they don't know the exact questions to be asking. And I mean, the fact that they're talking to a professional that's been in the industry for over 33 years now, I think it also puts the parents at ease as well, because they're probably more comfortable talking to you as well, rather than the children that, maybe they don't want to see a bit older or a bit frail to the children as well.
Correct. Well, aging's tough, and the older you get, the more problems you have with your health. So whether it be cognitive or physical, something always goes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on to the next slide here, and I think it's probably it comes into the difficult questions that you need to ask. You know, where does the client wish to age? And I suppose, you know, as we see here, what is currently available, and does it align with the parents' wants and or needs? And I imagine there's plenty of options in terms of whether they stay at home, they downsize, even aged care facilities, those sort of things.
Look, there's a huge number of options, and often when I'm
Mm.
doing a speaking engagement, I put up a slide and there's about 12 different options, and that's not all of them. But, you know, a lot of people say to me, you know, I can ask a room full of people, where do you want to age? And they all want to age at home. It's not always
Yeah.
possible to allow
Yep.
them to remain at home. It costs quite a bit of money to have home care, but it's talking about the different options available just to get people thinking. I mean, for dementia specific, there's group homes that have got like a normal residence. It's got it's been retrofitted. It's got 10 bedrooms, so it can house up to 10 people. So it's like a mini residential aged care facility. There's group homes for disability that might hold 2 or 3 people who have got severe disabilities all in one place. There's retirement living, and I think we're going into that a little bit later, and I can explain the difference between retirement living and residential aged care. There's respite centres. So when you have a daycare centre for a child, it's a similar
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing for elderly people, that if you're had a diagnosis of dementia and you're a bit worried about your mum, dad or whatever, we can try and get them in for a daily centre, like almost like a men's shed. There's men's sheds for men who have got maybe early onset dementia. I've got one client at the moment who goes to the men's shed nearly every day, and it's just a few hours. But it gives him occupation while his wife's at work. So there's lots of things. There's residential aged care, there's end-of-life care, there's so there's hospices, there's hospitals, and there's aged care facilities that manage that process. So what we try and do is just talk to the client about where they'd like to age, but majority want to remain at home. And as I say to a lot of people, if you don't want to remain at home, sell up everything, go on a cruise ship, because I tell you what, the cruise ships are doing a wonderful bit of trade at the moment for elderly people. It's cheaper for people to do that and travel on the world cruise ship and have care on site. There's a doctor on site, there's a nursing, there's pharmaceuticals, there's people, different faces every day. They're going to different ports. Food is copious amounts of food. They get their linen done. So, you know, there's options. And, you know, apparently one of the cruise lines did let me know that their morgue is full every time they come back into Sydney. So it holds up to 5 people. So, you know, people are actually doing this. So it's an option.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I suppose one of the things you mentioned earlier as we move forward is that estate planning manner, and talking about, I think, power of attorney, enduring guardianship. These are, I suppose, difficult decisions for people that are moving into those facilities to make. And I put there, who are these commonly given to? And I mean, I suppose from our own, some of our own clients, a lot of them will place it in the hands of their spouse, or it'll be another sort of family member. But I suppose it's not sort of one size fits all, or that's the rule of law. You give to a family member, it can be a close friend. So have there been cases where, you know, I suppose you've seen them give them to a close friend, or they didn't have family members to give that kind of control to?
Yeah, I'll just go over what they actually are, because a lot of people have the misconception of what they are. So, and it's always good to get really good legal advice and obviously financial advice as well. But the power of attorney is for if a person loses capacity and they need someone else to act on them, this person can actually act and make financial decisions for that person. An enduring guardianship is a person that, if the person loses capacity, to make health, care and accommodation decisions. So they're very different roles, and sometimes they're the same person, sometimes it's the children, sometimes it's the lawyer. You know, it could be a lawyer and an accountant working together for a particular client. It could be a financial advisor and an estate planner that would be working on behalf of that client. But generally speaking, I had a client who was 60. I'd helped her mum into aged care. Her mum was in her 90s and she eventually passed away, but she was the only living relative in Australia, and she said to me, but what happens when I get old? What am I going to do? Who's going to look after me? Who's going to make sure I get the right care? So we worked and she figured out 2 very close friends that could work jointly and severally as both power of attorney and enduring guardian on her behalf should she lose capacity in some way, and for them to be introduced to DR Care Solutions, and we developed a life plan that should something happen, it's enacted, and those people can contact DR Care Solutions and make sure that she's getting her wishes fulfilled. But yes, so it could be close friends if you don't have living relatives close, or sometimes parents don't want to trust their kids with that responsibility.
Of course, absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen that a few cases on the financial side, so it would make sense that enduring guardianship follows suit there as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it just depends. Everyone's different. I always work with the family to make sure they've got those documents in place. And another document that isn't listed there is called an Advanced Health Directive, and that's a living will. So that if you are on life support, what are your wishes? If you do you want intervention? Do you not want intervention? Do you want to be taken off life support? If you've got pneumonia and you're suffering, or well, you're living with dementia, is it that you want to be let go, or do you want them to provide you with antibiotics? So it's a one-pager generally, but it is also a legal document that a lot of the aged care facilities do require when a person is entering into an aged care facility.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I imagine having that conversation with that document alone, that's very difficult, because it's talking about at the end of life essentially.
It is indeed. Yeah, so I mean, it's something that has to be talked about. And you know what? The other thing that we didn't cover was wills. Only 50% of Australians have wills, and I just can't believe that people who have assets, children, siblings, parents, properties, whatever it is, that they don't have a will. And you know, I've spoken to a number of lawyers that don't even have wills, and I'm going, what? Like,
I know, it's
to me,
shocking,
it just
isn't it?
doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So you know, if you've taken anything away from this today, make sure you've got your estate planning in order, because if you don't, it can create all sorts of problems, and you have to go through the court system to get authority to act on behalf of a parent who has lost capacity. So it's a time-consuming problem, and also costly. And so I say for a few $1,000s to get your estate planning done, it's done and dusted. You may never need it, but it's there if you don't need it. So
absolutely, it's one of those sort of one of those life administration tasks that we don't like to think about or even do, as you just reflected based on those stats. And absolutely, and it's funny you mentioned it's quite common that even though lawyers that might specialise in doing wills and estate planning, they don't even have one, because it just again comes down to laziness. There's some irony there. But
well, I was actually asked at one of my speaking gigs, well, have you got it? And I said, absolutely, I've got it. You know, I've got my 2 kids are jointly and severally, both my powers of attorney and enduring guardian, my will's up to date, and an advanced health directive is written. So I've got it all done. So I can get on a plane.
Happy to admit, so am mine. So that's good.
Good on you.
Otherwise,
good on you,
would be hypocrites. Number 6, this is important because I'll be honest, I have no idea about the aged care process, and I imagine majority of Australians don't either. And you know, the aged care process, you've already thrown out some terminology there before, my aged care, NDIS. I mean, what is the aged care process to get in? I mean, you mentioned ACAT assessments and those sort of things, funding. Are you able just to run us through a bit of a step-by-step or play-by-play on how it works?
Yes, so My Aged Care is the government portal for anyone who is over the age of 65. So they recommend, a lot of GPs will recommend that a person over the age of 65 registers at My Aged Care. They might not need support or care at this stage. So it's recommended that one of their children or a designated representative is with the person when they make the call to My Aged Care. You will need your Medicare card and your parents or whoever, your loved one's Medicare card, and they'll have to give authority to My Aged Care that you, the designated representative, can act on their behalf should it be needed. Then My Aged Care will go through probably about half an hour's worth of questions about what you can do, what you can't do, what you're finding difficult, what you're not finding difficult, if you're driving, if your health is good, and they will then determine which sort of assessment that you're sent. You know, you might not need an assessment. For example, my mum's 82, she doesn't need any assistance, and they said, well, you don't need anything. You're registered, but you don't need any assistance.
That's just because she's healthy? Is that right? Just because she's healthy, she's mobile, she's pretty independent.
Yes, at this stage, but she's 82 and anything can happen. A life event can occur and the whole situation will be different. So the two assessments that My Aged Care will organise is one through the, it's called an RAS assessment, and that is a regional assessment service assessment, and that's for entry level domestic support, meals on wheels, transportation, maybe some social support, and that is where you are, it's subsidised care, so you are, or support, you need to pay additional amount for that. So it might be gardening, a little bit of gardening. There's massive wait lists, and that's through Commonwealth Home Support Program, and that is, there's massive wait lists on that. You'd be lucky to maybe get domestic assistance once a month, once a fortnight if that, maybe 1 or 2 hours. So that's where I work with the client to say, this is what you need, this is what you're able to get from the government, why don't we work on how much cash flow you have to top that up and make sure you get some private fee-for-service hours as well. If you've got a little bit more care needs, that your condition's a bit needing more support, that's through the ACAT services, and that's a different assessment. So you might have to go through those two processes as you age. So you might need 2 assessments over a period of time. And the aged care assessment team will come out and do a more comprehensive assessment of the client, and that will determine whether you get a level 1, 2, 3 or 4 home care package. And all those levels mean is it's the degree of funding. So a level 1 package gets around $8,200 a year to spend on any service within the home or on your person, and that gives you about 2 hours a week. It's not a huge amount.
Gosh, yeah.
A level 2 package is around $13,000 a year, and it's not a huge amount either, but this means that your degree of services requirement is getting more, and that will give you about 4.5 hours a week. Not a huge amount either.
No.
Level 3, now level 3 and level 4, they're like hen's teeth, and you can wait 24 months for a level 3 or level 4 package. So this is more higher care needs. So a level 3 is around $32,000 a year, and that will get you probably about between 9 and 13 hours a week. It's not huge again. And the big hairy one, the level 4, everyone wants a level 4 package. Here is around about $52,000 a year that you're getting from the government. And it is means tested, so there is a means tested fee, and you do have to contribute. So, you know, there will be a certain daily care fee that you need to pay for. Sometimes families weigh it up and say, look, you know what, we'll just pay fee for service rather than going through all the Centrelink issues and having to fill in forms and getting mum or dad means tested, and it's distressing, and particularly around money. Sometimes the family just say, look, we'll spend $1,000 a week on care or support services. How much will that get us? So, you know, often that's the case. So you've got your 4 levels of home care, and currently for a level 3 and level 4 packages, there's 123,000 people on the wait list. So, and the government just released another 10,000 packages, so that's going to bring it down to 113,000. But yet it's growing daily because people are getting onto the My Aged Care system and being assessed and in line. So you're virtually in a national queue waiting for your time. So someone either has to move up a level to release that funding to let the next person on the list, or die, or move into residential aged care to free up that funding. So there is only one bucket of money, and the government is being very cautious about spending that. So having said that, though, from the My Aged Care side of things, for NDIS, so people under the age of 65 who have a disability, it runs parallel. The systems are fairly similar. The NDIS assessment process is very similar, but what they do is they actually calculate what the actual person needs. So do they need 10 hours a day of support? Do they need a wheelchair? Do they need new rails in the bathroom? Do they need transport? So they cost all that out, and you can have a huge amount of money contributed to your case, but it has to be managed by a fund provider that can actually manage that funding.
Do they have different levels with the NDIS, or is it mainly purely assessed based on a needs analysis?
Correct. Correct.
And
So
then,
one of my
and,
clients was assessed and he had initially 108,000, so it's not too bad, but given his
mm,
care needs, he really needed about 250,000, and that was
mm,
12 months ago. He's just recently been assessed and it's just moved up to 160,000.
mm,
So, you know, his condition is deteriorating, so they've
yeah,
seen that he does need more care, and that's
mhm,
why they put their funding up. So, and we all pay for the NDIS in our
yeah,
Medicare levy.
yep,
It's an extra an amount, and I think that long term, maybe after the Royal Commission, it may be that they'll bring the systems together and the funding together and make sure that the people are getting the right amount of funding for their needs. But
yeah,
also those that can afford to pay for it will be required to do so. So, you know,
yeah,
even with disabilities. And as I said, how long does it take? It can be quite a long time for the funding to come through. We can start care and assistance immediately through private providers, but it costs
mhm,
fee for service. So, you know,
yeah,
it
yeah,
can be done. When people say, gosh, mum will be dead by the time, you know, 2 years has passed, I say,
yeah,
look, we can keep her at home, but we need to
yeah,
look at how much we can afford to pay. And that's where the advisors come in. That's really
yeah,
important to understand what the cash flow is and if other
mhm,
family members are all going to contribute to keep that person living at home for longer than anticipated.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the important factor there is, the fact that there are different levels based on the assessments, but also the timeframes. I mean, I wasn't aware that it can take that long, and I think it correlates directly to our point one. You know, early planning, plan early intervention. Let's have the discussions now, because even if we get you on a wait list now for say a level 1 or 2, you might not see any funding for 12 to 24 months, which
Correct.
is pretty scary,
Hmm.
because even though they need those services, and if say if they're living on an age pension, they're not going to have the capital. So then obviously the kids and obviously relatives need to come up with that capital. So plan early, otherwise you're left in difficult financial positions and having to make even worse financial decisions because you never had the discussion.
And you're limited for choice too. You're really
Mm,
limited for choice if that's the case. And if you don't plan ahead, and say someone is on a pension and something happens, they have a life event and they can't go home. The doctor said, no, you can't go home unless you have 24-hour home care. And the family go, well, we can't afford that. So they end up in residential aged care. So we find them a facility that suits their needs. And, you know, it's not the greatest outcome, but if they've got no other options. So that's why I always say to people, don't just plan ahead for retirement, plan ahead for your aged care as well. It's really
yeah,
important.
yeah,
Mm.
and I think this slide sums it up pretty much perfectly, and we pretty much just touched based on it. Essentially, aging
Mm.
population, the queues are getting worse, they're getting longer, especially with those different levels. Planning ahead and having the family discussions now rather than mainly being at reactionary and then a life event occurring, as you've coined, and essentially having to plan around that and essentially, drop everything that you're doing, whether it's a case that you're an expat working overseas, coming home, and then, leaving yourself open to those difficult sort of situations where, okay, we don't have the capital. And as you've just mentioned, if you don't have the financial means, then you're left with a lot of, I suppose, you don't have many options at all. And is that just based on different services costing a lot less than maybe those premium services?
Look, I think that, it's probably that as well, but also that, you know, if you aren't planning ahead and something happens and you are just, you know, in a pickle, you're absolutely in
Mm,
a pickle. And the hospital has said, you know, that your mum might be in hospital, and the hospital said, we need her out, we need that bed back by Wednesday. And the family just go, you're joking, what are we going to do?
what are we meant to
So,
do?
you know,
Yeah.
that's right. So, and if you want to get them home with good quality care, it's got to be worked on very, very quickly, and then you
Mm,
worry about the funding later. But a lot of
mm,
people will say, look, you know, getting equity release from the parents' home, because a lot of older people want to remain in the old family home, big family
yep.
home with stairs, and you know, they don't want to leave it. And I can understand that because it's got a lot of memories and it's familiar to them. And so often there's a few cases that I've worked with where we've got equity release to enable
Mhm,
them to stay at home. The home might have been worth $2 or $3 million, and we
yeah.
get some equity release back on it, $250,000 or $300,000, and that keeps that person
Yep.
at home for a couple of years longer.
Yep.
And really, in the scheme of things, compared to the cost of the property, it's not a huge amount of money when, you know, the family, a lot of families don't like that because they're going, that's our inheritance. But, you know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Of course.
it's the parents who have worked their butts off to make sure that they've got that sort of money available to them or access to
Absolutely.
it.
And that's the whole reverse mortgage scenario that you just mentioned. And I mean, with interest rates as low as they are at the moment, it's probably an option which is open to a lot of people these days, which they haven't even thought about. And you're right, I imagine that's a difficult discussion to have with the kids, expecting that, you know, in a few years' time they're going to receive the house, but now there's this debt associated with it. Once the house is sold, things change. So yeah.
But in Australia, with property the way it's going, the money gets back. You know, the capital increases. So, you know, seriously, it's not a huge dent in it, I suppose you could say. You know, and you're getting your parents their wishes. You know, if they want to remain at home, how can we make it happen? And particularly if one of the couples dies and the other one wants to remain at home, and then they become socially isolated and all sorts of problems can occur then. So what we try and do is make sure that they're not socially isolated, that they've got care coming in, at least like a welfare check on a daily basis to make sure they're having medications, food, shopping, that they're showering, the house is clean and that sort of thing. So socialisation is a big killer actually, or lack of socialisation, and the loneliness for older people is really tough. And there's not community like we used to have when we were growing up. People don't worry about their neighbours. They don't talk to their neighbours. And, you know, trying to make that happen again is going to be really tough. We've all got our heads down, tails up. We're just going about our daily chores, our Groundhog Day, and we forget about the, you know, people next door who are, you know, in the 80s or 90s who might be having a fall or lonely or not eating. And, so there's lots of issues around that too. So, yeah.
And one of the topics, or one of the items you just mentioned was, I suppose, someone coming in, cleaning and providing the socialisation side. But I guess that feeds in well to this next slide in being, you know, what is the right care? Because as you've already mentioned, there's so many different options around what you can do, what sort of services you can use, whether it's someone coming cleaning in or cooking meals or even Meals on Wheels or moving into another facility. And when you showed me these figures, I was shocked. I'll be honest, I didn't know that there was over 3,000 aged care facilities in Australia.
There is.
900 home care providers. How do you choose the right one? I mean, that's I don't know how you would do it.
It's a tough one. It's you know, and that's where clients will ring me and say, you know, we've got to a point where we've got to choose a home care provider. Which ones? You go onto My Aged Care and you put in your postcode and it brings up 52 and you're going, well, which ones are good? It's, you know, a really big concern. Same with aged care facilities. You might get 52 in the area you want to be in. You're going, okay, where do I start? Which ones are good? Which ones aren't good, which have been sanctioned, which have got non-compliance, you know, what do you do? So with the home care providers, given my length in the industry, I've done my due diligence. And I have a care provider network of 25 home care providers around Australia.
Jeez,
so we've got
you shrunk it from 900 to 25, jeez.
Well, they've proven themselves. You know, they've got my clients that really provide top quality care. We do end-of-life care and the providers are amazing. And look, there's also marketplace platforms where they're popping up all over the place, where it's just people themselves, individuals going up and putting their profile up, almost like a dating site but for carers. And there's pros and cons to that. You can get someone cheaper on that basis, but you've got to manage your parents, or they've got to manage the care team. You know, you might have, what happens if that person doesn't show up and the elderly person really needs to have someone turn up. So that's why I work with quality home care providers. And what I look for when I was searching for my 25 providers is I want some well-established organisations, not just people running on a mobile phone. I make sure that they've got a premises. I understand how they recruit their carers and support workers, and that's really important, that they do all have police checks and that they're all fully insured and employed by the home care providers. Some home care providers will contract out or subcontract out to people, and that worries me that's, you know, it's like a second layer. I work with the home care providers. I find out which ones have got high case management fees and high admin fees, and we squeeze those down to make sure that our clients get the best deal for the best bang for their buck. So if they've got a $52,000 package, that they're getting more hours than another provider who's charging, you know, 50% case management and admin fees. So it's a matter of knowing the background, who is behind this home care provider. Are they a family business? I mean, there's a trust around family business. Have they, what sort of clients do they have? What geographical areas do they cover? What sort of carers do they have? Do they have registered nurses or just care workers or domestic cleaners, gardeners, all sorts of things like that. So we've narrowed it down to 25. So that's on that basis. And with the aged care facilities, I helped develop about 3 years ago a platform called Care 360, and that covers every aged care facility in Australia, and it's a filter and it's algorithm based. So you put in details about the client and within their financial capacity to pay and which location they want to be in and the services that they want, the lifestyle that they want, whether there's a GP on site, podiatrist and that sort of thing, allied health providers, and it filters it out and gives you the top 10 facilities in that particular area. So at least it's, you know, I mean, if you're going on to My Aged Care, you're getting your 52, whereas this brings it down to 10, and then you can do your due diligence on that too, and it gives you a lot of information about each of the care facilities. And then obviously you go and do the tours if you want to do that yourself, which can be very time consuming, or DRK Solutions can do it, and we can do 3 or 4 tours in a day, have that all organised, make a decision and move the person in very quickly. So that's how we work on that basis. So the right care is just right facility. And look, what's good for your mum or dad, James, might be different for my mum or dad. And that's why I have to be totally impartial and independent and make sure we get the right outcome for their loved ones.
That's right. And I think I remember a story you told me, Danielle, how when you went and checked out, I think it was an aged care facility, you even had the clients, I suppose, kids on the phone doing a bit of a video chat, showing them the actual facilities, walking through, asking the questions, so they felt like they were there, but you're the one that's essentially been their proxy, but knowing what questions to ask as well. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. And not only that, the smell factor. I know
the
that's
smell factor.
Yeah, the minute you walk through an aged care facility, you can tell, because obviously a lot of older Australians are incontinent and facilities are not always as clean as they should be. So I always say to the family, you know, if they're not there or I'm there on their behalf, no, I've got a really good sensitive sense of smell, and I'll know straight away whether that's going to suit a client or not, because then you've got to make sure that the right care is being, you know, that there's quality care in place and that there's not only
and it's hygienic as well.
Yeah, hygienic. You can walk in and you can smell it, really not like a hospital, but you know, you can smell that it's clean, and you can walk through and go through the kitchen area. One of the things I do with the aged care facilities is try and do tours at lunchtime, so I can actually smell the food, see the residents eating the food, see those that can't feed themselves, how they're treated, checking the staff out, making sure that the staff are actually engaged with the residents and not just rushing through and just trying to feed the person and get to the next person. So, you know, that's a bit of a tip as well, to make sure you go around lunchtime if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I wouldn't have thought, that as well as the smell factor. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's just one of those extra tips that we just don't know, especially when it's around hygiene in those areas. The next slide, as we can see, you know, we touched on it briefly. We're going to elaborate on it now, and it's comparing, you know, retirement village versus the strata apartment. Let's start off with what the difference is, retirement village versus the strata apartment, and how care essentially wraps into that.
Well, a lot of people get confused, that they think a retirement village for an over 55s village is for care. Most retirement villages don't have care on site, but it's a lifestyle, it's a community, and there's activities and things that, you know, what you would want to be doing in your retirement. So you can move into something like that. If you're downsizing into a retirement village, be really, really careful and look at the terms that you're signing on that. Make sure you get really good legal advice, because a retirement village, the way they make their money is not only a weekly or a monthly fee that you pay to the management, but when you leave, after buying into that village, when you leave, deferred management fee, and that can be as high as 30%. So if you buy into a place for $500,000, you'll lose 30% when you leave. So, and that goes to the retirement village. So when we're talking about strata apartments, when people are downsizing, you know, the choice is theirs as to whether, you know, if they've got a strata apartment, they won't have the community feel unless it is you know, that they know everyone in the apartment block. They've got their strata management fees, they've got their rates, and they've got to do their own maintenance internally. So it's like an independent living, like where I live here in an apartment. So it's an option. I had an accountant come to me and he said, well, I need to know the pros and cons of what's a retirement village versus a strata apartment. And he was an accountant. So I said, well, you're the figure man, so you tell me, you know. So he ended up buying a strata apartment because, you know, he felt that that was a better value for his bang for his buck. And he felt that while they're both well and, you know, managing okay, that they could bring some home care in if they needed it. They could even stay there till the day they died with support in a strata apartment. A lot of retirement villages really don't want you to have care in the village because it's when, you know, people are walking around with wheelie walkers or wheelchairs or even with dementia, that's not a good quality for them to resell the retirement village, that there's old people.
No, of course.
They can't kick you out, but sometimes they can actually request that you need to look at somewhere else that's got more care. But you can bring in 24-hour care into a retirement village till the day you die if you wish. So that's sort of, you know, the differences between a retirement village, a strata apartment and residential aged care. What I say to people, often I go into a client's home and they've been there for 50 or 60 years and they're full of stuff, absolutely full of stuff. So what we sort of say, we have a bit of a project and rather than being overwhelmed and going, gosh, where do we even start? I can either introduce someone that can help them to declutter and save what they want and get rid of what they don't want, or they can do it themselves, just one room at a time, so it's not overwhelming, and they can talk to the kids and say, you know, I'll put things aside that I thought you might like. Do you want to keep it? And just doing it slowly and never too soon to start. We're a very materialistic society and we seem to have stuff. So when I've downsized from a large home to a smaller home and now to an apartment, I got rid of stuff. So I'm minimalistic now. But so I don't want my kids to have to go through and toss stuff out, you know, and when I die. I think if we're all very clear on what we want to keep, what's important to us, but to start the process now, and particularly if you've got aging parents or grandparents, start that process now. Otherwise you've got hoarding problems and squalor problems down the track. And I had one client that's parents were living in a terribly full home. It took him 8 weeks once we moved his parents to an aged care facility to clean out that house and get it ready for sale. And he said the numbers of skip bins was unbelievable. And he said there was nothing in there that we could salvage. You know, it was just really sad. But, you know, so it's he said, God, I wish we'd done this years ago, like to help them downsize or declutter. But it was 8 weeks to clean out a house, getting it ready for sale. So
do you find, Danielle, I suppose when you're going through the process with clients that are looking at strata apartments or retirement villages, I suppose, do any of them keep anything in storage? Do any of them get a storage shed or anything like that? Or is it mainly just a case where, listen, it's time for a big cull, get rid of it all, or get rid of things that don't matter anymore?
It depends on the size of the house and what's important to them, because I mean it might be someone in the eastern suburbs of Sydney or in Melbourne, you know, in St Kilda, that's got beautiful paintings or, you know, antiques or whatever, and they might just not want to get rid of it at that stage. So, you know, and it might be, you know, an asset that they don't want to get rid of. So yes, people have storage containers and, you know, they have, they pass stuff off to their kids who then put it into storage containers and wait till the parents die and then sell it. You know, I mean, it's crazy. But, you know, people do keep containers and all sorts of stuff full of stuff. So
Gosh,
it is common. It is common.
Absolutely. This next slide, you know, I want to flesh out more about DR Care Solutions. I mean, we've focused a lot on the process, the different things that people need to be aware of, the tips, you know, especially planning early, and not, that way it's not reactionary, and the different types of, I suppose, care solutions, but mainly more about just DR Care Solutions, you know, your process for assessment. You've mentioned already a life plan a fair bit, and it'd be good to have a bit more understanding of what a life plan is for someone and how that all operates, and especially just your process.
Well, look, generally speaking, we get referrals from financial advisors, accountants, estate planners and lawyers who know about our
Yes.
services because they're very good technically on what they do, and they
Mhm.
might know a little bit about aged care or disability care, but they don't understand the nitty-gritty. And I don't profess to understand the financial side of things, and I've got a bit of knowledge, but I don't touch that side at all. And it's
Mhm.
like the estate planning. I know a bit about it, but I would never get into writing contracts and that sort of thing. So what we do at DR Care Solutions is spend time with the advisor over the phone initially and really understand what they've noticed about that particular client or that client's
Mhm.
parent, and just get a bit of a fact find from them. We'll then spend time with the family over the phone generally, just understanding from their perspective where they see mum or dad is at this stage, or grandparents are at, and say, look, do we think that we start the process now, or should we wait until something happens, or
Mhm.
what the process is. And as I always say, plan ahead, best to start and just have the life plan done. You don't need to implement it until something
Yeah.
happens, but if it's done, the first part of the process. So the first part of the process is DR Care Solutions consultants go into the person's home and
Mhm.
work, generally not just one-on-one. We like to have family members present, so
Yep.
or a power of attorney, or even the advisors often
Mhm.
come and they're quite amazed at how thorough the process is. And we go through it, talking about their physical care needs, their cognitive care needs, their wants, their wishes, could be their spiritual care needs, that they're very religious, or that they're
Mhm.
Buddhist, or whatever that they're their thing. What their hobbies were, what they did in the past, to really
Yep.
understand the sort of care that they may need in the future, and the sort of people that we'd be recommending to care for this person.
Mhm.
Say if they've been a Supreme Court judge, you want to make sure that you've got someone educated to come in
Yeah.
and be able to have discussions with that person. If they're engineers, they want somebody that's actually worked either as in a professional capacity, or that knows a bit about engineering. So it's really interesting to work with the clients to understand their whole life. So it is a
Mm.
bit like a fact find that you guys do. We
Yeah.
find out who
Absolutely.
else in the family members, how many grandchildren, how many great-grandchildren, the roles of the kids in that, if there's children, if there's no children, what's the situation? And we go through their estate planning, make sure that they've got that in place. A lot of people don't have that, as I said before, and just
Mm.
it's more a holistic approach. And so it's even about like dental appointments. When was the last time
Yeah.
they went to the dentist? Hearing tests. What's happening with their optical? Have they got macular degeneration? Have they lost their confidence? Have they had a fall? And that they, really lost their confidence and don't really want to be alone. Do they need any monitoring devices? Like a personal alarm that has GPS tracking or falls detection? Do they need any other products or equipment in the home to enable them to remain at home, such as it could be a willy walker, it could be rails in the bathroom, it could be a shower chair, it could
Mm.
be numerous things that will help them to remain at home. I've got a client with Parkinson's at the moment. She hasn't been able to feed herself, and she's in her 80s, and I found a spoon that actually is a new innovation, and
Mm.
while she's
Ah.
wobbling, it stays
Yeah.
stable and she can actually feed herself. She said
Yeah.
to me, it's given back my independence, so that she doesn't have to get her husband to feed her. So,
Yeah.
yes, the spoon was $300. She didn't care. It
Yeah.
was giving her her independence back. So I work on all the different things that we can bring in and, make that person, enable them to remain at home for as long as
Mm.
possible. So in that plan that we develop, I go away afterwards, the DR Care Solutions consultants go away. We pull that
Mhm.
together in a life plan,
Yep.
and that just gives you an idea of what we do and how we do it. So it's
Mm.
that fact find gathering, and then it's on recommendations too, that we've discussed home care, and this is a good plan to have, or if they really need to go straight for placement, we'll recommend that as well. And sometimes people are unsure, they want their parents to remain at home, and it might be a decision that I say, look, if their conditions too deteriorated to remain at home now, so we need to look at getting them placed into residential aged care, because I've got a duty of care to the elderly people to not leave them floundering or vulnerable in that state. So, working with the families and saying, look, I can't recommend home care on this basis. And then, so we go away. There's resources in that too. So say someone's
Yep.
developed dementia, there's resources for the carer and how to manage that process, and to have support, a support network from the carer's perspective. I'll also put in other resources as well that might be for, a lockbox for, a key for the front door, and just things like that. You wouldn't even think about an investment register, a password register, so that it's all in there together. And so those recommendations are there. And then we go away and we wait for the go-ahead to go for implementation. That would be either introduce up to 3 home care providers, or find a retirement village, or it might be to actually find a residential aged care facility. So, and that's the second part of the process. So it's, we don't charge by the hour. It's a set fee for the first part of the process and a set fee for the second part of the process. But then we do review and follow up. And this is, a lot of people go, oh gosh, how much is that going to cost? There's no additional cost on that. So, there's clients who I assisted 4 years ago, nearly 5 years ago, lady with macular degeneration. She's still got home care. She's 95 now, and we've kept her at home. With good quality care. So, we every month we are in touch with the family and in touch with the provider. Just make sure things are going well. With those that are placed into residential aged care, we're seeing that people who are going into residential aged care going in much later. It used to be in their 70s. Now we're seeing people in their 80s, late 80s going into residential aged care for end-of-life care, or really if they've got bad behavioural issues or if they've got no money, they're going into residential aged care facilities. So what we will do is we'll go and visit them about 6 weeks after they've moved in, just to make sure they're settled. A lot of people are placed in voluntary, and it's quite a difficult situation. So it takes about 6 weeks for someone to settle in, to realise that this is home and they're not going home to their own home. And that's a tough situation, but it's always nice to follow up and make sure that they're happy. I went and saw one of my clients today. He was 98 actually. He has been living alone. No medication the whole year, and we've had home care coming in a few times a week just to check on him. He did have a fall, fractured his hip, and he's had a significant cognitive decline after having surgery, so that can often happen too from a general anaesthetic, and given his age. So we've actually placed him into residential aged care, and I saw him today, and he said, look, I'm not happy, but I understand that I've got to be here for my own safety and well-being. And I said, and
absolutely.
Relief and peace of mind to his son and his daughter, that they know Dad's being well cared for, and if he does have a fall, they'll deal with it, that he won't be left on the floor and that sort of thing. So, that's a really good outcome. And so the follow-up and review is really important, and as people's condition deteriorates, things change. So you might only need some domestic assistance today, but you might need personal care tomorrow, or nursing care, or wound dressings, or whatever it be. So, people's conditions can change, but we're across that and keep in touch with the clients, their kids or their family, and the advisors too, because sometimes the advisors pick up stuff. If they say, oh look, he's really deteriorated since the last time I saw him, I really think we need to enact a plan now to look at capacity and actually make sure that we've got a plan should something happen. So, sometimes it is the advisors that pick up that there is a deterioration, which is great, and they'll contact me on that basis.
God, it really is such a tough industry that you work in, or I suppose just the role and some of the things that you've seen and some of the things you've been through, especially. I mean, you mentioned about that elderly gentleman that, when you pay someone and it's involuntary, they don't want to be there, but it takes a while for them to get used to just handling that conversation, especially with the kids as well, which is always hard because,
guilt.
it's just, absolutely.
A lot of guilt. But you know what? I did this last year with my own dad. So when people say, do you really understand it? I'm going, yes, I lived and breathed this last year. And my dad died on the 1st of December last year, and he had vascular dementia, and his condition was deteriorating, and he kept falling. So he was a massive falls risk. So I get it, and I understand the pressure the families are under. I understand the pressure the carers are under. So Dad's partner was exhausted, and even with me saying, let's increase the home care. And she said, I don't want people here all the time. I'm going, look, it's either going to come to a point that we can't keep Dad here if you don't want additional care. So that was what happened, moved him into respite, moved him into residential aged care. But we had private fee-for-service on top of that just to make sure Dad had the right care. So, some people do that. So even when they're moved into residential aged care, we organise fee-for-service that can come in and visit them, because a lot of people in nursing homes don't have visitors. at all, and if families are busy, and particularly dementia. A lot of people dump and run. I know it's awful to say, but they've got to a point that they just can't cope anymore. So just make sure that people are getting visitors, and regularly we organise that as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Danielle, that'll bring today's webinar to a bit of a close. This next slide, it just reflects Danielle's contact details. So obviously, best contact for Danielle is danielle@drcaresolutions.com.au, or alternatively, go directly to our website, www.drcaresolutions.com, and obviously touch base there. I've previously been on Danielle's blog quite a lot, and even if you go back as far as 2015-16, it's an incredibly powerful and useful resource, especially a lot of the questions and conversations that you don't want to have. They're on there, essentially, and things that you need to be mindful of. Or if you're doing this on your own and you're doing a bit of a DIY project, the kind of questions you might need to ask the home care providers or the new aged care facilities, and things that you probably wouldn't have even thought of. And if you're unsure, then obviously Danielle's there as well. So I think it's an incredibly important job that you're doing, because I don't know too many people that are doing it, Danielle. I'm not sure how many, I suppose, competitors you have in your particular niche, but it's a tough job that you're doing, to be honest. I don't know how you do it, because it's such a hard conversation to sort of get those, I suppose, those children talking with their parents about.
Well, I've been in the industry, home care anyway, for 33 years, so it comes very naturally to me. As I said, I've lived and breathed it. I've helped 129 clients, as mentioned before, and 22 into residential aged care, and the rest with home care, and getting really good outcomes. Every single one of my clients has had a good outcome, and to me that's so satisfying. I'm more than happy to speak to any of your clients, expats, who just want to have a chat. There's no charge for that, and just to see where they're at, and particularly before Christmas or even after Christmas.
Yes, absolutely.
Once they've been home and they've really realised that something's not quite right, or that their family members are saying, look, we need to do something about mum or dad, that reach out to me. I'm happy just to have a conversation via Skype, Zoom, whatever it be. I'm more than happy to have a chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched base on a really important point there. Around now, this time, it's Christmas. It's when things are winding down, and a lot of expats do come home. They come home for 2 to 3 weeks. I literally had a client in today. They said they're here for 2 weeks and they head back overseas on the 2nd of January. Their purpose is here, visit family, friends, do the whole Christmas lunch scenario. It's those times where you should take note of any changes that might have happened to your parents, and have those hard discussions maybe on Boxing Day rather than on Christmas Day.
Yeah, I was going to say not over the Christmas dinner table.
No. We want to enjoy that delicious feast and enjoy those rumbles as well. So maybe on Boxing Day, have those conversations over tea. And Danielle gave some great examples of the type of questions you can ask. They're just day-to-day normal questions. How are you going? And if you're unsure, and once you've sort of seen that things have changed, that's when it might be a good time to touch base or get on Danielle's blog, have a bit of a read, and go, okay, maybe we need to start planning ahead, because as you've just seen and heard, early planning is key, because you don't want to be doing this off the back foot. And when things go wrong, like a life event, you need to plan quickly, and things need to be done within almost sometimes a week. It's important to plan ahead. But that'll end it today. Obviously, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you stopping by. In the footnotes of this obviously video, there'll be Danielle's contact details and a link to website as well, so you can always go there and refer to any further information. But Danielle, I appreciate your time today. I know it's been a good call, and I'm very happy that we were able to get you on and talk through this difficult conversation, difficult topic, especially it's just something that people don't think of.
No, thanks, James, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and to Brett as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle.